today's Energy Central Power Session entitled Accelerating Solar Deployment, How Software Can Turbocharge Efficiency and Boost Profit. Before we begin, I'd like to give a warm thanks and welcome to our sponsors, Sitetracker and Salesforce, for making today's event possible. Now, I'm happy to turn the floor over to the moderator of today's event, John Egan. John, welcome to the event. You have the floor.
Thank you, PJ, and I'd like to welcome all the 200 or so registrants who are joining us, as well as the speakers. This power session, this is where energy experts come to talk about trends in the industry, what is affecting the energy transition, and so on. And boy, I would really like to thank every participant today. There's almost no topic in the energy industry that's hotter than solar deployment, pardon the pun. And when something's growing as fast as solar is, you have to ask yourself, can it grow faster? What are the roadblocks? Where's the speed bumps? And what are the process improvements that can be made to allow solar to reach its full potential? So we've got 4 subject matter experts here today to talk about all aspects of this topic. And by the way, there is a ebook on this topic that will be made available, and PJ will provide the details at the end of the session. But today's topic, solar power deployment, we're going to start with market sizing with Silvia Leiva Martinez, who is the principal analyst at the Powers and Renewables section of Wood Mackenzie, which is a global energy research and consulting firm. She leads the North American utility solar scale service. She'll be followed by Tyler Lancaster, a partner at Energize Capital, which is a Chicago-based investment firm specializing in software and sustainable industries. Third up will be Malik Patel, who is the Director of Technology at New Columbia Solar, which is a fast-growing commercial solar developer in the Washington, D.C. area. And batting cleanup today is Kathleen Roberts, who is Sitetracker's Senior Customer Success Manager for Energy, where she helps customers use the platform more efficiently to identify profitable business opportunities. So we're going to go informal today. We're going to have a roundtable format where there'll be a number of questions that I can ask the panelists. So let's start by sizing the market. Sylvia, solar is obviously a critical ingredient in the fight against climate change. How did solar development do around the world in 2023, and what do you see as the roadmap for 2024?
Sure, thank you, John, and thank you everyone for joining today. Really excited to be discussing all things solar. 2023 was a great year for solar in the US and worldwide. At Wood Mackenzie, we recorded more than 417 gigawatts of new projects that came online in 2023, and this represents practically double of the capacity in 2022. So this was a very big jump in solar installations all across the world, all across all different segments. But there are 3 regions that I like to highlight that are driving these growth. First one would be Asia Pacific. Asia Pacific accounted for about 3/4 of all the global installations, so it's a very, very big market. And unsurprisingly, most of the capacity has been installed in China. I think we have all seen that there were very, very low module prices, so that is certainly driving solar build out in the region. And also there is some government support that is providing developers with areas specific for renewable energy development. So strong supply chain plus government support leads to extremely high levels of growth. Second region that I like to highlight is Europe. There were more than 63 gigawatts installed in the region. And this is a combination of steady growth on the tenders and auction side, but also we're seeing more PPAs. In Europe, PPAs are not as common as in the US. So it's good to see that there are more players involved and more bilateral transactions happening. Key markets to highlight: Spain, France, and Germany are seeing this growth across these 2 types of transactions. And last but not least, the US. The US had a remarkably great year for solar. This is the first time in the US history that solar installation has passed 30 gigawatts of installations. We actually reached 32, and it was mainly driven by the utility scale segment. If we think about 2021, 2022, there was a lot of turmoil related to trade policy and supply chain challenges, but it seems that all these issues have passed, and now we're seeing the levels of growth that we have expecting for such a long time. So this ease of the situation related to supply chain was a key factor for the levels of growth that we observed in the US in 2023. Now,
excellent. So, go ahead.
Sorry. Like this is like in the past, 2023. What should we be expecting for 2024? The momentum is going to continue all across the globe, but the growth is not going to be as high. We're all expecting a 3% increase in 2024 installations compared to 2023 levels. There is just like so much solar that you can build, and I like to highlight in particularly the US. We're seeing extremely high levels of interest. There are many stakeholders, financiers, utilities, developers, CPCs that are entering the market, so the interest is there. The problem is that there are not enough resources to actually get all these plants built. There is material, there is financing available, there is high interest, mainly driven because of the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, but still the market needs to grow in order to materialize all of this capacity that is planned.
Thank you, Sylvia. And I apologize, I interrupted, but I was going to ask if you had any additional color on the US market in terms of competitive dynamics, competitors, that sort of thing.
Sure. So the US is a very curious market because solar is a mature technology, so there are already well-established players, but also there's still some level of risk, particularly from the financing side. So we need to think about it in terms of market segments. So thinking about the DG side, distributed generation, residential and non-residential, the market historically has been relatively fragmented, but now with the passage of California NEM 3.0, this has driven consolidation of the market. Many of us have seen all the companies that have been out of business recently because of the low levels of sales driven by NEM 3.0. So we are in this timing history that we're seeing actually a market contraction for the DG space. For utility scale, right now there are all the incentives in place to drive growth. We're seeing well-established players becoming more and more established, but we're also seeing a wave of new players entering all across the board, financiers, CPCs, and developers. So this new entry of players is driving a very competitive environment, but also we're seeing that the large players tend to stay with other large players. So a large developer tends to stay with a large EPC because of the guarantees that they have in terms of performance, in terms of delivery on time, and so on. And like one interesting statistic that I have is that the top 10 developers in the US hold more than half of the total operational capacity in the country. So that gives us a sense of how concentrated the market is in this segment.
Interesting. Sylvia, there was an action yesterday by the Securities and Exchange Commission regarding greenhouse gas disclosures that corporations across the spectrum are going to have to implement in a few years. That is kind of the news hook for the next question, which was, what are some of the headwinds or tailwinds that you see for solar in the US going forward?
Yeah, so definitely first tailwind, the one that you just mentioned, climate disclosures, just because this is going to drive more players that were not originally involved in renewable energy to have this incentive to have cleaner sources of energy, and they will need to disclose that in their financial statements. Second tailwind that has come up in many conversations is development of the transferability market. So typically, large scale and medium scale solar is developed using traditional tax equity financing. And for those who have been exposed to that, it is a complex process. It can be expensive, it can be time consuming, and not all players, particularly smaller ones, have access to the big banks that provide this type of financing. So with the creation of the transferability market now, we have more access to financing because more players, corporates that typically are not investors in renewable energy now can become investors. So there is more more access to financing in general, and it's an easier process so smaller players can have access to financing that was not originally available before. And last but not least, the fact that there is more technology available. We are seeing new tracking systems. We're seeing new modules that are larger and with more capacity. And other software developments that are helping not only increase the site availability by having access to sites that previously were not available before, but also making the processes more transparent. It makes it easier for new players that have not traditionally been involved in renewable energy to have an easier way to understand, okay, what is this contract? How do I process all these, all these negotiations? Having a single source of truth that is digestible and it's easier to manage, because it's something that can definitely be extremely complex.
Right, and single source of truth is absolutely a topic that'll run through today's webcast. Final question for Sylvia. There seems to be a lot of talk about the gusher of federal money that's coming from the Inflation Reduction Act. I don't know if it's a gusher or if it's a trickle with a promise of a gusher, or are we going to have 25 years of trickle?
Yeah, in paper, and the incentives are there. So definitely all players have access to these vast amounts of money provided by the government. So it is there. The issue has been that the guidance to obtain that money has not been fully clear. Particularly thinking of last year, there were several projects that were stalled because we had no clarity on the transferability component. We had no clarity, or still are missing clarity, on the domestic content guidance. There was some guidance already released on low and middle income tax credit adder. So this uncertainty or this lack of guidance has been the item that has stalled. The incentives are there, and everyone can have access to them, but the fact that we don't have the full picture is what is driving this trickle, as you mentioned it. But
so there's more to come. I see. More to come, though.
Exactly. So what we're expecting is that as the IRS releases more guidance on how exactly to obtain these tax credits, then is when we're going to see the full impact of the Inflation Reduction Act. So we should continue to see growth over the next year or two.
So the trickle becomes maybe more than a stream, maybe a river even this year.
Yeah, probably. That's a nice way to frame it.
Okay. Well, since we're talking about money, let's go to Tyler. Now, Tyler brings the capital markets piece to today's conversation. Now, first, Tyler, for those of us who may not be familiar with Energize Capital, can you tell us a little bit about the firm and its investment thesis?
Sure thing, and thank you for having me today. So Energize Capital invests exclusively in digital platforms that accelerate the energy transition in some way or form. So this spans renewable energy, batteries, electrification, carbon markets, and industrial efficiency. We manage just over 1.2 billion of assets in total. We make investments as small as $8 to $10 million on the small end of the range, and as large as 50 million plus on the higher end of the range, to back fast-growing software companies that are driving the energy transition. We've made several investments in the theme of solar and solar software specifically. We have about 3 or 4 active portfolio companies in that theme, of which Sitetracker has been one since 2019 when we made our first investment in the company.
As a follow-up, let me ask you your thoughts about the role of software in accelerating the transition, kind of the subtext of the whole conversation today. I mean, what role does technology play in software?
Yeah, so a big part of our investment thesis is that we actually have many of the technologies required to drive the energy transition today. They're commercially available, they're economic, and they really suffer from a challenge related to deployment and efficient deployment and adoption more than anything else. And we found this to be true in many different technology categories. So photovoltaic, solar, wind, batteries, electric vehicles, heat pumps, you name it. Over the past decade or more, the costs of hardware and equipment have come down dramatically, which Sylvia had alluded to before with respect to solar module costs. However, the other cost buckets, non-related to the equipment itself, which we call soft costs, have dramatically increased. So this is everything related to customer acquisition, engineering design, actually managing workflows, financing these solutions, conducting operations and maintenance. I think the really crazy statistic for distributed generation in particular is that distributed solar in the US is anywhere from 2 to 4 times more expensive than in other countries, namely Germany and Australia. And our view is that that's mostly driven by inefficient processes where, historically companies have attempted to use manpower rather than leveraging technology to really drive efficiency in the process and deliver a more economic value proposition to customers. We think this is a massive problem hampering the United States, and we think it is a problem that software is uniquely suited to address.
Okay, so as module costs have come down, soft costs have gone up. So this is why we need to focus on the back office software platforms. One other question. I understand your firm has made significant investments in Sitetracker. Can you tell us what made it an attractive investment for you?
Sure thing. Yeah. So the history of our investment in Sitetracker is pretty interesting. We first came across Sitetracker's work actually through a separate portfolio company that was using Sitetracker to manage their deployment of an EV charging network. Most of Sitetracker's business historically had been in telecom, which is also an industry with highly decentralized distributed assets where a very large distributed workforce is working on constructing and maintaining those assets. So when we learned that one of our other portfolio companies was using it for an energy use case, we thought, well, the energy transition actually looks a lot like what has happened with telecom 20, 30 years ago as we moved to small cells and 5G relays and whatnot, with a very broad base of distributed assets rather than the more centralized energy system we'd had in the past. And so we made an initial investment alongside the Sitetracker team with the thesis that the solution they had developed for telecom could be applied to energy use cases, with the initial view that EV charging, commercial solar, and residential solar would be strong fits. Now, that obviously required a lot of work to adapt the product and, frankly, to adapt the sales and go-to-market motion as well to be specific to solar use cases. It's not exactly the same as telecom, but fast forward to today, I think when we first made our investment, Sitetracker had about 3 or 4 energy clients, and today it's like almost 200. So we think that thesis has really borne out, and I know Malik is going to touch on this after I wrap up here.
Wow, fast growing. Well, that is a nice transition over to Malik. So Malik Patel, our third speaker today, as you can see, is the Director of Technology at New Columbia Solar. Now, that's a fast-growing solar developer in the Washington, D.C. area. So, Malik, let me ask you about a topic we started on, and you're going to give us the developer's perspective. So as you scaled the company, you ran into a number of challenges, and one of them had to do with data, managing it, tracking it, aligning it, confirming it, and making it easily accessible. So talk about some of the challenges that are involved with managing the data flow as you're scaling up rapidly.
Sure. Thanks for having me on the podcast, John. When I joined New Columbia Solar, we were really drowning in a sea of unorganized information. It was coming into our emails quickly. It was being tracked, as I said, in emails. We were getting notifications from utilities that we had obligations or opportunities to connect projects. We were then putting information into spreadsheets, databases, shared drives. We were having phone calls to collect information from our colleagues and our contractors. It was very difficult to digest and synthesize all this information without a centralized repository. We had a lot of upcoming obligations that we didn't have full transparency into. We were missing deadlines. We were really unable to identify trends. We were treating our projects as uniform opportunities, not really accounting for the unique attributes or characteristics of each project. We really needed to have a more robust way that was managing these projects consistently, a way to manage the forecasts and timelines for these projects and build consistent budgets from the ground up that weren't different from one project manager to another. And then going through this digital phase and adoption, we really improved how we were managing our projects and took into account substantial variances that we were starting to identify and trends as we went on our transformation.
Okay, so Malik, I'd like to probe on that just a little bit. Could you get a little bit more granular in terms of the kind of information that became an information tsunami as you scaled up?
Sure. So we had a lot of activities unique to each department that really weren't being tracked, whether it was our utility interconnection departments, we call them AHJs, our engineering departments, accounting, and so on. We didn't really actually centralize the information unique to each department. So each time a project finance team member had questions about timelines, they'd actually have to go hunt down people. And as I said, we were putting this information in through a database, which lacked a good interface to put the information into. So there was a lot of resistance to just getting the limited set of data that we wanted on specific projects, let alone actually having documentation about where the interconnection application is, storing insurance certificates, just really basic information and attributes for each component. We weren't able to historically look back at projects and say how long it took to go from one process to the next. We really were tracking things based on financing milestones, leaving a lot of ambiguity for everything happening in between. So it was a huge challenge for us. We were spending a lot of time going from system to system and really wasting a lot of time. So having Sitetracker gave us the opportunity to really track information a lot more efficiently and consistently. And instead of having a lot of these meetings between the project finance teams and other departments to really identify key risk items and mitigation strategies, the project finance team was really using these meetings to gather information, make sure it was put somewhere really into a spreadsheet. And I like to think they were doing the project managers' jobs as well as our own jobs, because it was just overwhelming for project managers. And this idea that Tyler kind of mentioned earlier, where soft costs were really hard. And as we were looking to be more efficient and go into additional markets, it was really challenging because we just had this core issue where a project manager could only manage so many projects, but the idea of taking on software made it a lot more manageable. And then another theme I really want to tie on with this transformation is we really lacked any opportunities to manage asset management. That was a key area for us. We had a lot of information that we weren't really tracking from the field. We were able to get these tools in front of different teams. They were able to input information from the field directly into forms that we were able to tie back in the back office and do a lot more reporting on, which made the projects that we were developing a lot more predictable and routine. We had an asset management team that was really getting notification on the day we were given the opportunity to operate projects, which made it impossible for us to actually conduct quality inspections, get our installation teams or subcontractors out to do any commissioning, which is just to say, make sure these things are to a certain quality. And as a result, we had a lot of projects that were turned on that were not to our expectations. And that was causing a substantial set of problems for us from an efficiency and revenue standpoint. So we were incurring all these costs, and then the moment we had an opportunity to turn them on, they just weren't meeting our cash flow expectations that we developed in these project finance meetings. And then the last piece is really having predictability about what these asset management teams were supposed to do. When we had timelines and forecasts that were consistent, we were able to track when these projects should be inspected. We were able to make sure we had a good number of employees able to do it. And if we didn't have the resources we needed, we would be able to go out into the market and hire subcontractors to help us perform these routine activities. And in turn, over time, we were able to have projects turn from unproductive initially to very productive as expected, which is what our goal is a solar developer here in DC.
So streamlining processes, improving data accuracy, and making that single source of truth available to everyone at the same time. Any more granular details about how using Sitetracker has helped change the way you do business?
Yeah, so Sitetracker has been really great in helping us refine and understand our core market, because we had all these different teams focusing on their specific activities. We were able to get granular for the different installation types, whether it was carports, rooftop arrays, canopies, really understand how long a project of that type took, investigate how long a project in a different market would take. Each market is unique in a sense that their utility providers require certain documentation and milestones to be met in order for us to get projects completed. They were on their own timelines, and then further, there were unique attributes associated with different interconnection types, and we really needed to account for that. So as we started this adoption, went through the process of identifying and looking back historically on all these projects, and through Sitetracker thought about different templates that we could build for these unique projects and really have good forecasts, not just from a timeline perspective, but as events occurred that changed the timelines, we were able to easily update our forecasts, which enabled our project finance teams to be far more efficient in coordinating construction loans, to coordinate tranche closings with our tax equity finance partners, and just do it very quickly because all the information was available for them to just see rather than have to chase down individuals. And so our business is confident in our core market, and since we have this framework through using a process and a system, we're able to go into new markets, set conservative expectations for these new markets because we have baselines, so to speak, and then really just get comfortable with our working capital needs as we go into new markets. And in this challenging interest rate environment that we've heard a lot about, we're able to reduce our working capital needs pretty substantially, which is obviously helpful as others are folding. We're able to continue doing business and taking on new projects profitably and more comfortably.
Excellent, excellent. And Malik, just a detail question. Could you share with the listeners approximately how many projects you have in the Metro DC area that are
I think
operating?
we have about 300 projects in DC, and we're going into new markets, including New Jersey and Colorado, and taking on new opportunities as they come to us. We've really become a lot more comfortable taking on these opportunities than we have at any time in the past, because we've had an opportunity to really reflect on what it takes to complete a project and just to have a better expectation as a result.
Well, if your team comes up to Colorado to assess the market, make sure they stop by. We'd like to see them. Colorado is green and getting greener in a hurry. So that's all good news. Thank you, Malik. And all of that was a great way to set up our fourth speaker batting cleanup today, Kathleen Roberts. Kathleen is the Senior Customer Success Manager for the energy segment, and she helps customers use the program to optimize their success. So really, Kathleen, we're going to talk about solar as software as an accelerator of success, a competitive differentiator. So let me ask, can you share some client experiences with how they found the use of your platform has changed the way they do business for the better?
Yeah, very much happy to do so. You know, in my 5-year tenure here at Sitetracker, I have had the privilege in supporting a lot of different, energy efficiency, EV and solar type customers. And as Tyler mentioned earlier, I was really here at Sitetracker at the time when we had 3 solar customers, and now we're at 200 plus, right? So lots of solar companies come to mind, but 3 in particular I'd like to highlight. The first is New Columbia Solar, where Maulik did a fabulous job going into detail there. But if I were to try to summarize kind of where I see New Columbia Solar recognizing the most value from us, it's really in their ability to improve their project and job visibility, efficiency, and forecasting. I really can't stress enough how much Sitetracker's ability to provide Maulik and his team full data visibility into that entire process really helps them tackle projects and jobs faster and quicker. And based off Maulik's points, you know, their growth in their expected amount of projects that they're tackling is just constantly growing, especially in the DC and other markets. It's been a privilege, Maulik, working with you directly and really seeing your business activity become more and more predictable, going back to your points, and seeing each project and job become easier and easier to tackle. You know, it's not an easy thing to achieve standardization of data capture, but Maulik and his team was able to do that. And I've also seen them really see a lot of value in our reporting tool as well. Maulik, I'm sure you remember our dollars per watts initiative that we worked with together. And that's something I always remember and think fondly of, because it was a really good example of how our purpose-built tool tries our best to understand your specific use case, and we tweak the tool to meet your needs. So for everyone's you know, information on a summary perspective, you know, the dollars per watts report was really something that helped Maulik and his team capture the costs associated with the rate at which the solar panels they install are providing power to commercial buildings. So again, very, very cool. Pleasure working with Maulik, and it's great to see that you know, the value of Sitetracker is growing in the New Columbia Solar space. Another customer that comes to mind is Posigen. Posigen is actually in the residential solar side of the business, so separate from New Columbia Solar, where they're in the commercial side. Posigen really helps homeowners all over the US really install solar on their roofs. And they really utilize Sitetracker very similarly to how New Columbia Solar does it. They do it for project and job deployment. And I'm also their customer success manager, and I've seen them grow from under 200 users to now over 500 users. Most of them is really the users in the Sitetracker system is around leadership or their internal PMs or their install and channel partners. Very cool use case of how Posigen utilizes Sitetracker is they've invested in our Connect portal to really make sure that their collaboration with their install and channel partners is easier. So just to visualize it a little bit for everybody, we take like pretty much a partial take of Posigen Sitetracker and give some of that access to the partners in a community portal visual. So now every time the partners are updating the portal, those project updates are automatically being updated in Posigen Sitetracker org. So if you guys think about it, it's a lot less back and forth with emails and phone calls, and the collaboration between Posigen and their partners are just much better. I would say the last point I'd like to make on Posigen is they're really good at measuring very specific metrics that they consider success criteria for Sitetracker. So I recently talked to them the other day, and they confirmed that their updated numbers for these success criteria metrics are that I believe it's 28, they've recognized 28% decrease in their overall project cycle time since investing in us, and 34% increase in monthly installs, which is huge. And we continue to get those updated numbers really on a bi-yearly basis with them to make sure that they're continuing to see that value with us. And the last customer that comes to mind is actually not in the US, it's actually in Mexico. So Energia Real is, from my understanding, the largest distributed generation solar energy infrastructure in Mexico. And you know, I've had conversations with their leadership team, and they're very confident in their, you know, they're the best technology and the best solution, clean energy solution in the region, but they were less confident in their vendor's ability to deploy their infrastructure. So they came to us and said, hey, how do we improve this as quickly as possible so that we can grow and scale, right? So before utilizing Sitetracker, Energia Real was really only able to deploy about 30 installs at a time, and that's for their renewable energy PPA systems. And mostly because, you know, they were spending a lot of time on logistics or communicating with their regulators or whatever it is, right? But once they started investing in Sitetracker and utilizing us, they started to recognize the intelligence of the Sitetracker platform and our ability to help them really track critical and complex deployment tasks. So with us, they've now really experienced, not only they were deploying 30 installs at a time, now with us, they're deploying on average about 150 installations at a time, which is 5 times better. So my last point here is really across all of those customer examples, it's really by working more efficiently, every company is able to really deploy faster. And what's better is they're doing it with a lower or smaller workforce, which is a huge competitive advantage in the solar space. Going back to Sylvia's point on, hey, the biggest challenge we have is like resources, there's a lack of resources. Well, how do we do the work that's needed with the resources that we have?
So a force multiplier, I guess. Any other nuggets come to mind about how customers are using and benefiting from your platform?
Yeah, I would say I get a lot of feedback directly from users that they really enjoy using our tracker functionality. I'm sure Malik is going to shake his head yes when he hears this, because it's a very, very nice way to ease into the platform. So for example, for those of you that don't use Sitetracker, most of your PMs who are helping manage deployment of infrastructures or projects, they're probably working within an Excel sheet, right, that they've customized, that they use to manage their projects. What we like to do is replicate that within our Sitetracker instance in tracker form. And trackers is just an Excel sheet on steroids that lives within Sitetracker. So instead of having it be outside the system, it's in one single source of truth. Everyone can access the same information. If someone updates a cell in the tracker, it's updated throughout the rest of the system, and you can report on it. So I get a lot of good feedback directly from users on the ease of using trackers in starting to adopt the tool before getting into more parts of the tool, like asset management and beyond. And then what I would like to point out too is that we try to do our best here at Sitetracker in making sure we're tracking, efficiency gains, portfolio growth, and risk reduction metrics across our customers. So what most people should really expect on average is that, on an efficiency standpoint, most of our customers experience about 31% faster project completion. On a growth perspective, I believe they usually on average experience 41% project portfolio growth. And on a risk reduction perspective, they recognize about 78% project completed without rework, which again, the less we can tackle unnecessary rework, the easier it'll be to complete projects faster.
Well, the old adage, time is money, is still plain play, isn't it? So, Kathleen, we have some decision makers on the call today on the webcast, people who are going to sign checks if they're asked for your platform. So, can you give us a sense of what prospects who become customers can experience or expect?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to summarize it, what you should expect from investing in Sitetracker is that we're able to, serve our customers across the full life cycle of solar. There are competitors out there that really are experts on the, development side or the EPC side. We actually are a single source of truth and a trusted platform for the development, the EPC, the O&M, and asset management space all in one location. Like, we truly have tried our best to create a standardized but flexible, we like to say purpose-built, right, tool that really breeds efficiency and really encourages project growth. On a solar perspective, our goal is really to accelerate the world's transition into a fully connected and sustainable world. So we very much look forward to kind of learning more about the needs of our solar customers and helping them meet those needs.
Okay, thank you. Excellent. Well, we've got a couple of other questions that we'd like to ask, and why don't we start or keep the order we have. So, Sylvia, I have a question. Are there any additional insights you can give about the regulatory structure and policy landscape as we go forward for solar? I'm thinking federal, state, local, whatever comes to mind is a critical driver from the regulatory and policy arena.
Yes, so there are good things and bad things. Very good thing to look forward, interconnection and transmission reform. I think for many developers, it's been extremely difficult to have transparency on prices, on network upgrade costs and on the timeline, like, okay, if I start interconnection process, how long will my project be there? Will I pass all the stages? Like, what's gonna happen, right? So many people in the industry, including myself, are really looking forward to see the implementation of our quarter 2023 and see how this new policy is going to help reduce interconnection timelines and also have more transparency and lower interconnection costs. So that's a good thing. Not so good, there's still some uncertainty around supply chain. Right now, there is the Section 201 midterm review. So this could lead on potentially having tariffs applied to modules. Right now, bifacial modules are excluded from this tariff, but in this reform, there is a possibility that like this exemption is removed. And we also don't know what is going to happen with the self-tariff rate quota. This is like the volume of cells that can be imported to the US without any tariffs. And this is a big issue, particularly for manufacturers, because we have seen many announcements on module manufacturing facility, but we have not seen that many for cells. So that means that all the module manufacturers still need to rely on imported cells. So if you have cells with tariffs, then it's more expensive. The final module is going to be more expensive as well. So I guess like these are the two main things that we're keeping track of in terms of the policy landscape.
Right, and those are the competitive forces, excuse me, driving the industry. And you also talked a little bit about consolidation. Do you have any specific thoughts about that among EPCs as well as developers?
I guess like how I see it is like the survival of the fittest. We're seeing more players entering the market, but also not all of them have the experience. Not all of them have done solar before. Not all of them are familiar with interconnection processes, managing contracts. So what is going to be key, or what is going to be interesting to see, like despite having this wave of new entrants, not all of them are going to be competitive. So that's where, in this case, technology can be a source of this competitive edge, because time is money. So if you reduce the time dedicated, you reduce the resources that you need to sign a contract, to engage with the off-taker, to negotiate with the financier, like anything, that ultimately translates into savings. And now what do you need to reduce costs in your projects? Because power prices are PPA prices, they have increased, but we're not expecting that trend to continue. So since you cannot increase the price to remain competitive, you need to reduce your costs.
Right, so a rising tide doesn't necessarily lift all boats, because some of them are going to sink because they don't have the process efficiencies and the cost structures and so on. Okay, exactly. All right. Well, Tyler, I have another question for you, and I'm wondering about, could you riff on the future of software in the solar industry as it relates to what developments or trends you see in the companies that you're looking at to invest in?
Sure. Yeah, so a couple of themes that we're very focused on right now. Let's see if I can break them down into three separate areas. First is on customer acquisition. In the United States, we still have maintained a largely door-to-door manual-based customer acquisition and sales approach, whereas in many other countries, you've seen that process move to a digital-first approach, where folks are logging on to an installer's website and putting their address in, and seeing an accurate proposal presented to them. That has not happened in the US market, and I think there's a number of structural reasons why, but it's not because we don't have the technology that can enable that to happen. And that's one of the most significant drivers of soft costs across both residential and non-residential commercial solar in the US. We've started to address many of the other buckets like design and engineering, permitting, et cetera. but we have not really cracked the nut on customer acquisition. So that's a theme that we're very focused on at Energize. Second is on novel ways to leverage remote sensing data to as an input to AI-based approaches to design and simulate solar. So there's been really significant advances in satellite imagery data, LiDAR, which is effectively like a laser that is shot out to get a point cloud and characterize the three-dimensional shape of a building. These technologies are enabling us to create 3D models of effectively any building and the surrounding environment, trees, et cetera, which have a big impact on shading and project economics. So our view is that continued development of data acquisition methodologies which can feed into machine learning models will drive further automation in getting to accurate designs and proposals for solar projects. The third bucket, which we're also very focused on at Energize, is in the operating life of the assets themselves. And I think it's twofold. One, we're getting to the point where we have this massive installed base of solar projects that are aging pretty significantly and are either degrading in their production or coming up for some form of equipment replacement. And then the second trend is increasingly these assets are being connected with storage and other behind the meter energy equipment and participating in the grid, not necessarily on power purchase agreements, but as virtual power plants and tapping into new revenue streams, which can further enhance the project economics. Now, the ability for those projects to do so in an efficient manner is largely a data acquisition and device management problem. As well as a regulatory problem. We've got some work to do on the regulatory front to open up new revenue streams to these assets. They are a massive, latent, and under-tapped potential resource to the grid as we move into this new regime of a decentralized grid, and in a situation where we have growing electricity demand, but we don't necessarily have the wires to service all of that demand. So this is a theme that we think software and data has the potential to help solve and really unlock for this market and others.
Just a follow-up though, I'm wondering about scalability and what you've seen when you talk to potential investment companies or potential sources of your investment capital, as well as developers themselves. And we'll get to Malik in just a second, but I'm wondering about, as the industry looks at rapid growth, does it have the software infrastructure, let's say, to facilitate that growth, or is that going to just be a huge speed bump?
Well, I think if you look at the best and most profitable solar installers and developers out there, they have had a technology first approach from the start. And this industry, frankly, has suffered from a lack of profitability historically. If you look at some of the public solar companies, they frankly have not been that profitable. And we think that's in part because many of them have significant amounts of technology debt. They did not kind of architect their organizations and processes from day one with technology in mind. And so, as we look to invest in companies that can service solar developers like New Columbia Solar, that's really what we're looking for is, have these companies develop solutions that can service someone like Malik and drive profitability and efficiency in those businesses.
Okay, well, thanks for teeing up Malik. So the question I have for you, you're at over 300 projects now. There's a lot of people on the call that would aspire to that. Let me ask you about the way Sitetracker has enhanced collaboration, which is sort of one of those soft things that can be hard to measure, but you know it when it falls apart. Can you talk a little bit about how Sitetracker facilitates collaboration?
Yeah, definitely. We previously really didn't take into account a lot of the construction and project management inputs and financing activities, but now that we can get them in the field updating information in Sitetracker about the project performance and characteristics. We are much earlier in the development phase able to price the risk that we're dealing with. It used to take really change orders that would happen after contracts which were signed to make changes with our customers. And obviously nobody wants to be in a position where they have to modify a contract to get to a profitable point. But when we've started to bring in more teams earlier in the project lifecycle, even pre-contract signing, just with all the information that we've learned through projects that were completed in Sitetracker, where we tracked all this historical information, we're able to get a better sense of what the risks are. And again, to just see them laid out for us with specific information we're looking to gather, because we know we're going to be inputting it soon enough into our system, we're able to find ways to work around solutions or start to just price them differently. And that's been, I think, a competitive differentiator for us, because we've had the majority of the market in DC for some time now. And I think it's because we really have been thinking about all the different types of information we want to collect that are material to the business. And before we had this digital platform adoption, we were probably lacking in some sophistication, knowing that we wanted to get here over time.
So using, I guess I'd call them primitive tools. I mean, pen and paper, Excel spreadsheets, and so on. I mean, that has a direct impact on your ability to bid for a profitable piece of work, right?
Yeah, it's been really clear upfront what we need to do to make these projects pencil. And even though, as others have mentioned here on this call, that the costs continue to escalate on the soft side, we're finding that we're able to stabilize our costs by just collecting information upfront from various departments. We kind of have this template that I alluded to earlier, which really sets up for success, that we know what we want to gather before we even get to a point of starting these projects. So by the time we're having these initiation meetings where the project managers are accepting projects from the financing teams and the sales teams, we're saying, hey, you've answered all of our questions up front. We think the risk of having some variance here from the initial budget that was estimated is pretty low. Let's move forward with these projects, or find solutions for events that we didn't really anticipate are pretty unlikely. So we're spending a lot less time on phone calls trying to remediate issues with our engineering departments, or hiring expensive third-party contractors to help us problem solve issues we haven't seen up front. And then we can really just leverage these patterns that we've seen in the past for these new projects. So we can incorporate these costs that are somewhat fixed into these new project costs.
Yes, I guess it's hard enough bidding profitably for a project, particularly if you don't have information, all the information at hand. So we can see how that expedites your business success. Blaine, a couple of questions for you before we close out at the top of the hour. I'm wondering if Sitetracker integrates with other digital tools like enterprise resource planning. I see from some of the attendees, there are large enough organizations, they've probably installed at least one generation of ERP. The Sitetracker interface?
Absolutely. We have a full-on integrations team that handles a lot of very typical integrations that we do for a lot of our customers. You really mentioned the most typical one is with the ERP, mostly to attach financials, right, to the project process within Sitetracker. We've also connected to like ticketing tools to connect like the jobs and tasks aspect of the process all together. And then another common one that we see is really like connecting like a data warehouse tool so that you're connecting like your analytics and reporting as well. So some of our customers, for example, want to connect Power BI or Tableau in order to get information directly from Sitetracker.
Wow, awesome. So what level of customization is available within this solution to accommodate specific needs of different customers?
Yeah, great question. And I laugh a little bit because a lot of my background is in the Salesforce space. And for those of you that also have some of that background, the joke there is that if you have enough time or money, you can build anything you want in the software. And as a reminder, we're built natively on the Salesforce tool. So in a way that is true. We have a lot of potential on building a lot of customizations. The question is, should we or not, right? Yes, there's a time and place for customizations, but I feel like the Sitetracker team does a good job in providing technical consultants to really say, hey, we need to understand your needs. Hey, is there an out-of-the-box way of doing this, or do we need to go into the customization route? In the end, we want to make sure that it's something that is easily maintainable, but also meets the needs of our customers.
Okay, to riff a little bit further on that, what kind of training or support does Sitetracker provide to ensure a successful launch to customers?
Yeah. I mean, hopefully you could tell from how active I've been with a lot of our solar customers. We are not the type of customer or vendor to implement a Sitetracker into a customer and then say good luck. You're assigned to a customer success manager to make sure you're successful. But on a technical perspective, most of our customers also invest in what we call EDS hours, which is enhancement, development, and training hours. So they can take a bulk of technical hours to help with ongoing training needs, whether it be standardized training that we offer or customized training to meet the needs of the workflow for our customers. We can actually build custom training that our customers can then own and use in their LMS so they can onboard users in the future. They can also use those technical hours towards consultation. So going back to your point on, hey, should we customize something or should we do something out of the box? We have technical resources who have been around longer than I've been, which is over 5 years, that can provide really good, valuable information on that. And then there are people on the technical side that can just do the enhancements and customizations themselves if they'd like. So we have a lot of ongoing technical and strategic support here at Sitetracker.
Awesome. And any listener that wants to, I presume they can pick up the phone and call Malik. He's easy to find to give you a very hands-on, granular, as you like, discussion of how it's changed his business for the better. Well, this has been an excellent conversation. So thank you, Sylvia, Tyler, Kathleen, and Malik. I do want to thank the listeners for joining us today as well. Solar is one of the most important strategic drivers in the transition today. And I wanted to, before I toss it back to PJ to close, I certainly want to give another thank you to the sponsors, Sitetracker and Salesforce, and remind everyone that there is an ebook coming out on this very topic using the technology to accelerate success. And so we urge you to stay tuned for that. My name, I forgot to introduce myself, John Egan. I run a shop here in Denver that writes content for utilities and solutions providers to utilities. So we work exclusively in energy, and we'd be happy to take your call too. You can find us easily enough. So stay tuned, stay focused, and I'm going to go toss it to PJ for a final closeout. PJ?
Thanks, John. Thanks, John, and thank you, panel. Fantastic presentation. We want to again thanks to our sponsors for making today's event possible, Sitetracker and Salesforce. For our audience, just like John mentioned, look for an email from us containing both a link to the replay once that becomes available and the companion paper that will be published very shortly. Please take a minute also as you log off to fill out our survey and give us your feedback so we can use that for future sessions. From everyone here at Energy Central, we want to thank you for joining us. Have a wonderful day, and this does conclude today's presentation.